Amira Collins boarded the flight she secretly owned, just to see if anything had changed. Within minutes, a white flight attendant slapped her in front of a silent cabin for asking for water. No one knew her name, her title, or the billions behind her calm, but when she whispered 5 words, the entire plane froze. I own this aircraft. Now what? Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The private terminal hummed with quiet luxury, polished marble, soft leather chairs, and attendants trained to be invisible unless summoned. The boarding announcement whispered through the air like silk, and the first-class elite moved with the ease of people used to being at the top. Laughter from investment bankers, murmurs from diplomats, and the clink of crystal glasses until she walked in. Amira Collins stepped onto the jet bridge in quiet sneakers, tailored black joggers, and a hoodie bearing the logo of her defunct startup Skyloft AI. Her face was bare, no makeup, no assistants trailing behind her, no designer luggage rolling beside her, just a worn leather backpack slung over one shoulder and an expression of practiced calm. She moved with the silence of someone used to being underestimated. The murmurs began before she reached her seat. Flight's full these days. A white man in a navy blazer muttered to his wife as Amira passed. His wife nodded, eyes narrowing. They'll let anyone in first class now. The comments were low, designed to be overheard but not acknowledged. Amira didn't flinch. She'd heard worse in rooms far more expensive than this. As she reached row 1, she paused in front of seat 1A, her name neatly printed on the headrest screen. She placed her bag gently in the overhead bin. That's when Melanie Pierce appeared. Mid-40s blonde, starched uniform, and a pinched smile that looked practiced but rarely real. Her voice was thin, cheery in the way syrup can hide poison. "Miss, this is the first-class cabin," Melanie said, stepping in front of her with a condescending tilt of the head. "Coach is that way, just past the curtain." Amira didn't blink. She simply reached into her hoodie pocket, pulled out her boarding pass, and handed it over. Melanie took it, scanned it, then hesitated. Her smile froze. She read the name again. "Miss Collins," she repeated slowly. "My apologies. You just looked. Never mind. Please, take your seat." The words "you just looked" hung in the air like a slap. Unspoken but blistering. Amira slid into seat 1A without a word, her composure solid as glass. The woman across the aisle gave her a once-over, and then pulled her handbag closer to her side. The engine hum began to rise. Flight attendants finished their checks. The pilot's voice crackled through the speakers. "Welcome aboard. We're expecting clear skies on this 8-hour flight to Lisbon." 30 minutes after takeoff, Amira still hadn't been offered a drink. She watched as the crew served mimosas to every row, even the man who had just boarded 5 minutes late. But no tray came her way. Not a smile. Not a glance. When Melanie finally passed again, Amira looked up calmly. "Excuse me," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "May I please have a bottle of water?" Melanie stopped mid-step. Turned slowly. "We'll get to it," she replied without looking. "Try not to be so demanding." The silence fell over the row. "Excuse me?" Amira asked, more in surprise than confrontation. Melanie turned, folding her arms. "You've been giving me a vibe since you boarded. I've been flying for 22 years, and I can spot entitlement when I see it." The words dropped like bricks in a still pond. Nearby passengers turned to look. "I asked for water," Amira said again. "Not entitlement." Melanie stepped forward. "You people think you can bark orders just because you bought a seat in first class." She didn't finish the sentence. There was a pause, just one beat before the gasp. A sharp, ugly sound cracked through the cabin. Melanie's hand, across Amira's cheek. It was so sudden, so quiet, that for a second, no one reacted. Then phones came out. Passengers froze mid-sip, wide-eyed. A businessman dropped his glass, champagne pooling like a wound across his tray table. Amira didn't move. She didn't flinch, didn't hold her face, didn't even look at Melanie. She reached down, pulled a folded silk cloth from her bag, and dabbed the corner of her mouth like nothing had happened. Melanie was breathing hard, her face already pale. She began, voice cracking. "I didn't mean." Amira slowly turned to face her. Her eyes, deep and unreadable, didn't blink. "You just assaulted a paying passenger," someone whispered from the next row. The co-pilot stepped out from the cockpit, his face full of confusion. What the hell is going on here? Phones were still rolling. The woman across the aisle was live streaming to TikTok. Melanie looked around, realizing the moment was spinning out of her control. She began to stammer, reaching for an explanation. A denial. A plea. That's when Amira stood, all eyes on her. She adjusted her hoodie, smoothed the fabric over her shoulder, and walked toward Melanie. But she didn't yell. She didn't call for the air marshal. She didn't even raise her voice. Instead, she leaned in close enough that only Melanie could hear her, and whispered, "I own this plane." The cabin erupted in gasps. The co-pilot froze mid-step. Melanie's lips parted, but no words came out. And Amira. She calmly sat back down, pulled out a Kindle, and began to read, while the internet exploded one row behind her. Melanie fled to the galley, the clash of heels and the soft slide of service carts creating a dissonant racket behind her. Her chest felt tight, like her ribcage might crack under the weight of replaying eyes and phones pointed her way. She huddled with a fellow flight attendant, Greta, two carts between them like makeshift shields. She whispered fast, her words jagged. She looked. "What even is she?" Melanie began, voice trembling. She asked for water, just water. And then I snapped. I didn't know who she was. Greta's eyes darted back to the cabin with suspicion. "You slapped a passenger." Her tone was flat, judgment simmering. On camera. Melanie's hand trembled around the stack of menus in her cart. But she looked like she didn't belong. Her words faded under Greta's disapproving glare. A hush replaced their murmurs, as others in the galley tuned in, the violence of the moment still echoing in their minds. No one believed her narrative anymore. Not fully. Meanwhile, down the aisle, the co-pilot and the purser stood over a cluster of tablets. Videos of the slap, taken from different angles, rotated across the screens. Rows of shocked faces, the stilled champagne glass, Melanie's arm mid-air. The footage cut from passenger whisper to cold, clear fact. The co-pilot's jaw clenched. The purser looked away, silent. "They won't let this die," the co-pilot muttered, voice distant. "This is every airline's nightmare." But he didn't yet know some nightmares were self-made. Back in row 1, Amira sat perfectly still. The Kindle in her hands flickered under soft cabin light, but her eyes missed the words. Instead, her fingers tapped a rhythm, controlled, deliberate. She picked up her phone and dialed quietly, each number precise. Her assistant, Carla Morgan, answered on the second ring, calm but alert. "Carla," Amira began, voice low. "Prepare. We can't wait for landing." On the other end, Carla's voice was steady, professional. "I'm on it. CEO will be waiting on the ground. Press people. Security. Controlled access. As you said, keep it contained." Amira's lips curved slightly, almost a smile. She clicked hang up, slid her phone into her pocket, and exhaled, eyes narrowing, as she scrolled the flight number in time. She was watching the skies, and the chaos she'd engineered into control. There was a hum shifting in the air. Crew exchanged glances. The slur of gossip carried from the kitchen to the cockpit, from seatback to galley. The entire aircraft buzzed with a mounting tension only subtly louder than the engines. Gradually, the truth set in among the crew. Melanie's idea of "you people" wasn't just disdain. This was about a system, about privilege. And now she'd forced the system's face to stare back. Amira tapped her seatbelt once, twice. Small, deliberate signs of comfort. She pulled a small leather wallet from her bag, removed her business card. A sleek, minimalistic card that read, "Amira Collins, founder and owner, Blue Nova Aviation," and dropped it into her bag without looking. The card remained her silent signature. Carla's name flashed on her Kindle screen. Another encrypted message came through. She opened it. The CEO's assistant, who reported directly to Amira, was mid-flight on another Blue Nova jet. He was briefing the ground operation, coordinating cameras, security, journalists, all converging the moment this jet landed. The cabin's tension, the viral wave, all aligned with an unfolding precise plan. In the galley, Melanie scanned lost glances. Greta avoided her eyes. Two other attendants whispered about Ivy League econ grads suing over discrimination. Another speculated about union backlash. The purser, looking pale as linen, cleared her throat. "Melanie," she said gently, voice steady, "you need to go to the rear. Sit down, collect yourself. We're filling forms, declarations. Captains want statements." Melanie nodded numbly, and retreated, her ego crushed, her hate now a public wound bleeding viral shame. At the cockpit barrier, the co-pilot tapped Captain Doug Wallace's shoulder. Doug looked grim. Sir, the footage is everywhere. Passengers are messaging news desks already. The CEO's name is trending, and Flight 1112 is now being flagged on their systems. Doug closed his eyes, leaned back, and exhaled. Pushback and boarding was smooth. This changes everything. A sudden buzz reverberated through every crew iPad. Uniformed arms now mid-slide. Screens lit up with urgent Blue Nova security alert. Protocol 452 initiated. Panic didn't pulse, but it rippled with coordinated efficiency. The crew froze. Their carefully structured flight world splintered under a new message. This was more than an incident. It was a boardroom move. A public statement. A confrontation sparked in the air. Melanie, in the back, heard her tablet ping too. Her screen glowed with the same alert. She stared at it, dread coating her voice before she even whispered, "What now?" Every uniformed hand hovered over the alert. Every crew member stared at their screens, at each other, awaiting the protocol's next instruction. And none of them were ready for what Blue Nova had planned next. The cockpit was quiet, too quiet. Captain Doug Wallace sat stiffly in his seat, arms crossed, watching the secure message on his primary console flicker in bold red text. Confidential. Passenger 3A. Amira Collins, owner, Blue Nova Aviation. Authority overrides active. A small Blue Nova corporate seal pulsed in the corner, confirming the encrypted channel. For a long beat, Doug didn't speak. He rubbed his temple with 2 fingers, the weight of the situation dragging across his face like fatigue. He had flown dignitaries, heads of state, CEOs, but then a billionaire in a hoodie, silent and composed in 1A, now commanding authority over his entire flight crew. Without saying a word, he exhaled, slowly turning toward the co-pilot. Oh, she wasn't bluffing. The co-pilot leaned in, squinting at the screen. "Sir, is that real?" Doug didn't answer immediately. He tapped a few keys, verifying encryption signatures. The identity alert was bulletproof. HQ confirmed it. Cross-referenced. Timestamp. The passenger in 1A, Amira Collins, owned the plane, the crew's contracts, the airline, the board above the airline, and even the in-flight software they were using to check her ID. Doug leaned back. "It's real." The co-pilot let out a long breath. "She's not just first class. She's the class." Meanwhile, in the rear cabin, Melanie was pacing like a lioness in a shrinking cage. Her screen had pinged too, but she refused to open the message. Her sense of order, of superiority, was unraveling. Greta returned from the front, eyes grave. "She's the owner," Greta said flatly, voice low enough for only Melanie to hear. Captain confirmed it. "She owns Blue Nova, the whole airline." Melanie scoffed, her voice laced with panic and disdain. No, that's not real. That's a hacker prank. Some glitch. People make fake titles all the time." Greta didn't flinch. The alert came from a triple encrypted HQ channel. "It's real." Melanie's lips curled slightly, searching for something to hold on to. "It's all staged," she muttered. "She's playing a role, that's all. These people, they think being rich makes them untouchable." Greta took a half step back. "These people? You just slapped a billionaire, and now you're doubling down?" Melanie's voice rose, more to convince herself than anyone else. She didn't look like one. She was dressed like a tech intern. No assistant, no luxury luggage. You saw her. I mean, who does that? Greta stared, her voice suddenly colder than the galley freezer. "Billionaires who don't owe us proof." In the cockpit, Doug toggled the comms. He didn't call Amira, he didn't page security. Instead, he made a logbook entry. "Pilot confirms passenger 3A has executive override privileges per HQ directive. Emergency codes pending. Crew adjustment protocol 452 in process." The legal consequences were already in motion. First class had morphed into a silent theater of suspense. Amira hadn't moved from her seat, but the storm around her raged online. An influencer in 2C, one Lily McHale, was live tweeting the drama. "I think the woman just slapped by a flight attendant owns this plane. Holy flight." Another tweet from the journalist seated in 3D, Daryl Kent, added fuel. "She just whispered, 'I own this plane.'" The flight attendant vanished. Everyone's frozen. "I've never seen this before." Comments began flooding in. Blue Nova's Twitter account was tagged over 2,000 times in 20 minutes. Hashtags were already forming. "Slapped while black" was trending in New York and Atlanta. And Amira? She just sat there, calm, absorbing the chaos like a mirror to their discomfort. Then, without fanfare, she rose. No music. No drama. Just the slow, intentional movement of someone who had nothing to prove. She adjusted the sleeves of her hoodie, smoothed her collar, and stepped down the aisle past stunned faces, shocked murmurs, and racing thumbs. The flight attendants in the galley turned toward her instinctively, their backs straightening. Melanie froze mid-sentence, her face turning a brittle shade of pale. Amira didn't raise her voice. She stood in the narrow space, her presence quiet but commanding, and looked at each uniformed face, one by one, before speaking. "I'd like to address the crew," she said softly. Her voice measured. "All of you, right now." The silence after her request was heavy, not with defiance, but with the eerie pause of power-shifting hands. Greta nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am. Right away." Melanie stiffened. "You can't. This isn't protocol." Doug's voice suddenly echoed from the overhead speaker, his tone different now. "Neutral. Corporate. Per Blue Nova Executive Override Protocol, all available crew members are requested in the forward galley for a cabin-level leadership address. Immediate compliance is expected." The order came from the cockpit, from above Melanie's chain of command. It wasn't a suggestion. Melanie turned toward Amira, trembling, her lips twitching like she wanted to speak, but couldn't find the words. Amira didn't gloat. She didn't sneer. She simply looked into Melanie's eyes, calm and unblinking, and then passed her toward the others. "I'll wait," she said. As the crew assembled under quiet orders, phones still buzzing in seatback pockets, a second alert hit every screen, this time from Blue Nova's legal department. It contained one line: "Prepare cabin for CEO-level in-air press intervention." No one, not even Amira, had expected that twist. The galley had never been this quiet. The crew stood in an uneven line, uncertain whether to brace for discipline or apology. Melanie hovered near the wall, hands clasped tightly in front of her, her knuckles pale. Her gaze flickered between her fellow attendants and the woman she now knew could destroy her entire career with a single call. But Amira didn't start with punishment. She stood centered, hands clasped lightly in front of her, and took one long breath, anchored, thoughtful. Then she looked directly at each of them, her voice soft but commanding. "You need to know who I am," she said. "Not because of money, but because I've sat where you're standing." There was a pause. Not dramatic, just real. She allowed the moment to settle before continuing. "I was born in South Atlanta. My mother worked 3 jobs. She cleaned houses in Buckhead by day, folded shirts in a laundromat by night, and spent weekends serving food at weddings she couldn't afford to attend. I was 5 when I realized what exhaustion looked like on a black woman's face." None of the crew moved. Amira's voice didn't rise, but every word pressed deeper than the last. "By the time I was 10, I'd memorized every bus route in Fulton County, because we didn't have a car. My mother taught me how to speak with authority so teachers would stop assuming I was acting out when I raised my hand too often." She took another breath, this one heavier. "I got into Harvard on full scholarship. Computer science, top of my class for 2 years. But one night, during finals week, campus security stopped me as I walked into my own dorm, said I didn't look like I belonged. That night, I left Harvard. Not because I couldn't make it, but because I decided to build something where I didn't have to prove I belonged." A sharp intake of breath came from one of the younger flight attendants. Melanie shifted slightly but said nothing. "I started a company called Skyloft AI, from a friend's garage in Roxbury." Amira continued. "It optimized airport systems, flight logistics, and personalized travel experiences using neural network models. I pitched it 1,116 times before one VC finally gave me a check. 10 months later, that same VC offered me $150 million to buy half." Now the crew were frozen, not just in awe, but in self-awareness. They were realizing how much of her they had judged on sight, how many decisions they'd made before she had even opened her mouth. "By 30, I sold Skyloft for $2 billion. I bought my first jet, not to flex, but because I was tired of being questioned at every gate." She paused and looked directly at Melanie. "And yet, even then, I wasn't immune." The tension returned. Amira stepped closer to the crew, her posture never aggressive. But there was fire in her truth. 2 years ago, I was boarding a different Blue Nova flight. First class, quiet night, dressed down. A flight attendant, one of yours, asked me to step aside, said I must be lost. Then tried to upgrade a white passenger into my seat. while I was still standing there. A sharp silence. I didn't say anything. I didn't tweet. I didn't sue. I went home and started calling investors. And 6 months later, I bought the airline. Quietly. Anonymously. Greta's hand rose to her mouth, her eyes glistening. The weight of the truth hit differently when the system you protected was exposed by the person you'd hurt. I didn't want to make headlines. I wanted to create change, from the inside. Amira said, her voice now tighter, more layered. I funded anti-bias training. I upgraded diversity programs. I pushed for systemic review. She looked around the galley, each crew member frozen in place. And then today happened. Her eyes met Melanie's. I asked for water. No one moved. Even the engines outside the cabin seemed quieter, as if the whole sky leaned in to listen. Amira's voice cracked, just barely. And you looked at me the way security guards used to, the way teachers did, the way police have, like I was a problem in need of removal. The words were not loud. They didn't need to be. They carried the gravity of 1,000 microaggressions, of years spent bending to fit into a world that constantly questioned her right to exist within it. She let the silence linger before delivering her final line, the one that shifted the air itself. This isn't the first time. Greta stepped forward, almost trembling, ready to say something. But before she could speak, a new chime echoed through the cabin speakers. The captain's voice returned, but it wasn't just for the crew. Ladies and gentlemen, he said cautiously, we've received mid-flight authorization for a live statement from passenger 3A. A broadcast will begin in 5 minutes across all onboard screens. The crew gasped. And Melanie? She whispered. She's about to go public in the air. Some stories take days to reach the public. Others, like lightning, strike the world in seconds. This one exploded before the jet crossed the Atlantic. It began with a passenger in seat 2C, Lily McHale, a lifestyle influencer known more for fashion hauls than activism. But even she knew injustice when she saw it. She had filmed the moment the slap landed. No shaky hands, no blur, just cold, clear reality. A white flight attendant striking a composed black woman seated in first class. And then the whisper, I own this plane. Lily had posted it with a caption that would change everything. Flight attendant slaps black billionaire mid-air. No hashtags, no emojis, just raw truth. Within 20 minutes, the video had over 600,000 views. By 30 minutes it had been reposted by 3 civil rights groups and reshared by 2 Hollywood celebrities. The speed wasn't just viral, it was volcanic. Amira, still standing at the front of the cabin, didn't reach for her phone. She didn't need to. Her presence alone now radiated control, as if gravity itself had shifted to orbit around her. The crew dispersed slowly, shaken, carrying the weight of the speech they'd just heard. But somewhere in the economy cabin, whispers grew louder. She's the owner? She got slapped? On video? She should have been in coach, then none of this would have happened. That final line came from a man in 21D, middle-aged, business casual, whose opinion had never been questioned in boardrooms. He said it softly, more to himself than others. But the words carried forward like a toxin. It was the same thing people thought when Amira walked into 5-star hotels, when she drove up in her Bentley to investor meetings, when she entered the room first, not last. She should have been somewhere else, not where they had to see her, not where they had to question their own assumption. Meanwhile, national news desks lit up. CNN breaking news. CEO Amira Collins slapped on her own plane by flight attendant. Developing story. MSNBC. Black billionaire assaulted in first class. Incident sparks industry-wide reckoning. Fox News added their own spin. Was it a setup? Blue Nova billionaire claims discrimination mid-flight. But what no one expected was what came next. While Melanie sat alone in a rear jump seat, scrolling frantically on her tablet, a new alert dropped. An anonymous account posted screenshots to X, formerly Twitter, exposing 3 prior complaints against her for aggressive conduct toward passengers, 2 of them black, 1 South Asian. Internal investigations had not found sufficient cause at the time. The screenshots came from what appeared to be internal HR files. Confidential. Someone on the inside had leaked them. The post was captioned simply, "This wasn't her first time either." Melanie's face turned a dangerous shade of white as she read the thread. Her fingers fumbled across the screen. "No, no, no," she whispered, voice cracking. "This was supposed to be nothing. I didn't." Greta, standing in the aisle, looked over her shoulder briefly, then turned away. It wasn't nothing anymore. Meanwhile, Amira's phone finally buzzed. She pulled it from her hoodie pocket, still standing in the front, and glanced down. 13 unread messages. She read only 3. Jeffrey Thomas, CEO of AeroCap. Just saw what happened. Say the word and I'll go public behind you. Kendra Ali, award-winning civil rights attorney. I'm here. Already drafting filings. Press charges or not. Your move. Viola Davis. Yes, the Viola Davis. You just became a mirror for every black woman in power. I stand with you. Amira didn't smile. She didn't cry. Her face stayed still, but her fingers tightened around the phone. Just enough to show that beneath the poise, something in her was finally cracking. Not from weakness, but from recognition. This wasn't a personal moment anymore. It had become historical. Behind her, the screens on the seatbacks flickered to life as the crew executed the captain's orders. Blue Nova's signature logo pulsed softly as a broadcast link loaded, a direct in-flight statement from the owner herself. A hush settled again across the cabin. Even in the back, passengers stopped flipping through in-flight magazines. Children hushed, heads turned toward monitors. Melanie saw her own pale face, reflected in the window. For a brief second, she looked like she didn't recognize herself. Before the broadcast could begin, the cockpit door clicked open. 2 men entered. Quiet, plainclothes, confident, not passengers. They walked with synchronized ease, stopping at the front of the aircraft. They didn't speak to Amira. Instead, they leaned toward the captain's door and knocked once. A secret code. The captain opened the hatch. One of the men slipped a federal badge into view. No announcement, no chaos. Just one clean whisper. We need to speak to you. Urgently. From behind her, Greta's voice was a whisper. Are those air marshals? The co-pilot stepped out. Pale. They're not just marshals, he muttered. They're federal. The taller agent stepped back and looked directly at Amira. Not with threat, but with deference. We've received instructions from Washington, he said quietly. You're not just the owner anymore. They want you to prepare a statement for the nation. And with that, a new screen lit up. This time not just in the plane, but in press rooms across the world. The plane was quieter now, but not from peace, rather a hush of suspended judgment. Passengers leaned forward, seatbelts forgotten. The seatback monitors had gone dark again, after the captain's brief statement, and now the entire cabin seemed to pulse in sync with the unfolding drama. And in the midst of it all, Amira stood grounded, calm but coiled, a monument of grace under surveillance. From behind the service curtain, a quiet voice called her name, barely above a whisper. Miss Collins, may I speak with you? Amira turned. The voice was warm, familiar in some odd, buried way. She followed it around the galley partition, where a senior flight attendant, Yolanda Green, stood with her hands trembling slightly. Yolanda was in her mid-50s, dark-skinned, with soft but tired eyes, and a posture that had been shaped by decades of servitude. She didn't look like the others. Her presence felt heavier, more seasoned, as if she'd carried more than just passengers through the skies. Amira tilted her head. Yes. Yolanda took a breath, but the words caught in her throat. Then, with effort, she stepped closer, her voice shaky. You might not remember me, she said, but I remember you. Amira's brow furrowed softly, politely. I was your maid. Your mother's, actually, back when you were maybe 6, maybe 7 years old, in South Atlanta. House on Forsyth Street. Amira blinked, stunned. 1,000 faces from her childhood blurred together, but then like a beam breaking through cloud, a memory returned. A woman who braided her hair once when her mother worked late. A soft laugh, the way she used to call Amira Little Rocket Girl. Yolanda, Amira whispered. Yolanda nodded, eyes now wet. Yes, baby, it's me. For a moment the two women just stared at each other, one frozen by the shock of memory, the other by the weight of something long unspoken. Amira stepped forward, her voice cautious but soft. You were there and then you weren't. One day you just disappeared. Yolanda looked down, ashamed. I was fired, she said, swallowing hard. Someone said I stole money from your mother's purse. I didn't. But by the time I could explain, the neighbors heard. Your mother told me not to worry, said she'd clear it up. But no one else ever hired me again. That was the end of it. I was marked. Amira's breath hitched. A flicker of pain darted across her face. She did clear it up, Amira said. I remember. She told me you were innocent. But we moved soon after. She said we couldn't keep you because of the rumors. Not the truth. Yolanda nodded slowly. I figured as much. Still, I never blamed her. I just missed you. I used to think about you, watching those planes, always talking about flying one day. The emotion in Yolanda's voice cracked open something inside Amira that she hadn't expected. The girl who dreamed of flying, who used to stand in the street with arms spread like wings, suddenly stood in front of the woman who once encouraged her to dream. I became a pilot in my own way, Amira said softly. And you were part of that. Yolanda's tears spilled now. She reached out hesitantly, unsure if she was allowed. But Amira didn't hesitate. She stepped forward and embraced Yolanda, not with distance but with the fullness of memory reclaimed. A black child, and the black woman who once protected her, reunited on a flight now defined by racial tension and corporate power. In that embrace was healing, of misunderstandings, of a system that tried to erase both of them. As they pulled apart, Yolanda wiped her face quickly, regaining her composure, though her eyes still shimmered with emotion. I need to tell you something else, she said, her voice shifting, lower now, heavier. Amira nodded, attentive. This isn't the first time Melanie Pierce has done something like this, and it's not the first time I've been there when she did. Amira stiffened. Go on. Yolanda looked around, making sure no one was eavesdropping, then leaned in closer. 2 years ago, she began. I was working the same flight you mentioned in your speech, the one where someone tried to take your seat before takeoff. That flight, the attendant who did it, her words slowed, as if afraid to say them, was Melanie. Amira's jaw locked. The realization landed like thunder in her chest. Are you sure? She asked, barely containing the chill in her tone. I'd bet my life, Yolanda said. She didn't recognize you then. You had sunglasses, braids, different look, but I remember you. I remember her. She had this same energy, disbelief, like you couldn't possibly belong where you were. Amira inhaled slowly, fury smoldering under her control. The first incident that made her quietly buy Blue Nova had also been Melanie. The same woman, the same pattern. History hadn't just repeated itself. It had refused to change. Yolanda continued. I never said anything. I didn't want to lose my job. Again. But today, after seeing this, after what she did to you, I can't stay silent anymore. Amira nodded, slow and sure. Her eyes didn't flinch now. She reached into her pocket and handed Yolanda a small matte black card. The same one she'd shown no one else during the flight.
Vice President of In-Flight Equity, Blue Nova Aviation.
Effective today, Amira said. If you want it. Yolanda's eyes widened. Her hands trembled as she took the card.
I don't know what to say.
You already said enough, Amira replied. Now help me fix what this system keeps breaking. Before Yolanda could respond, the intercom crackled again, an emergency override. Captain Doug's voice returned, tight and strained. Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats immediately. We've received clearance for an unscheduled descent. Something urgent is happening on the ground. And as Amira looked out the small window near the galley, a police escort was forming along the runway. But it wasn't for her. The cabin lights flickered once, then again, as the engines subtly adjusted. There was a shift in tone now, almost tangible, as if the pressurized air inside the aircraft was preparing for something bigger than turbulence. Seatbelt signs blinked to life. Passengers straightened up. Even the frequent flyers paused, sensing the gravity in the captain's tone, as he addressed the cabin with deliberate cadence. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. His voice crackled through the speakers, heavier than before, laced with something just short of apology. Due to recent developments on board, we will be making an official statement per FAA protocol and company policy. A change in leadership has been executed mid-flight, and I'm here to clarify what that means for all passengers and crew. A murmur swept through the cabin like wind through tall grass. Several passengers leaned out into the aisle. The woman in 3B clutched her pearls instinctively. A man in 4D removed his headphones, eyes wide. In the rear galley, Melanie froze. The cockpit door opened, with a soft click, and Captain Doug Wallace stepped into the aisle. Not just a voice now, a face, square-jawed, tall shoulders squared by decades of authority. He took a slow walk down the aisle, his captain's hat under one arm, every step calculated. Then he stopped at the curtain separating first class from the rest of the cabin. I'm not just speaking as your captain, he said, turning to face the passengers. I'm speaking as someone who has just been briefed fully on who exactly is sitting in seat 1. Every head in first class turned to Amira. She remained seated, spine straight, face unreadable. This aircraft is part of the Blue Nova elite fleet, Doug continued. And the individual in 1A is not just a first-class passenger. She is, in fact, the owner of Blue Nova Aviation. Gasps, followed by a long, reverent silence. She has full executive authority over this aircraft, including crew conduct, passenger safety, and public protocol. At that, heads turned toward Melanie, who stood frozen near the jump seat at the rear, her face washed of blood. Doug's voice dropped slightly, but each word hit like a hammer. Her Blue Nova corporate mandate, Flight Attendant Melanie Pierce, has been relieved of her duties effective immediately, pending an internal investigation. The cabin erupted, not in chaos but in applause. Not wild, not celebratory, but a slow, almost reverent sound, a release of tension, the kind that builds when something wrong is finally addressed. The woman in 3B began to clap first, then the man in 2C joined, then, one by one, they all did. Even passengers who had whispered about Amira when she boarded now clapped, not just out of respect, but regret. Tears welled in the eyes of the elderly black woman in 4A, who looked at Amira and whispered, "We waited a long time for someone like you." Amira did not stand. She didn't bow. She simply nodded once to the cabin. Meanwhile, at the rear, Melanie's hands trembled, clinging to her tablet like a lifeline. Her breathing grew uneven. Her world control seniority, entitlement, was unraveling midair. "No," she muttered. "No, this is insane. You don't get to just rewrite what happened." She opened the front-facing camera. Her lips trembled, but her ego burned brighter than her fear. She pressed live. The screen flashed. "You're now live with 3 viewers." Then 27. Then 93. Melanie looked straight into the lens, smile forced, voice coated in sugar and desperation. "Hi friends," she began. "This is Melanie Pierce, senior flight attendant for Blue Nova. I want to set the record straight because what's happening right now is not what it seems." Her voice trembled as she continued. "A passenger has claimed ownership of the airline and is forcing me off duty. I was simply doing my job when she..." But her words were interrupted by someone off camera. Greta, her colleague, stepped into frame, her eyes wide. "Melanie," she whispered, urgently, in the stream. "You were making it worse." Melanie ignored her. "This woman is... Look, I didn't know who she was, okay? She didn't look like a VIP. You all saw the clip, it was taken out of context. She was aggressive. I was scared." The comments on her live stream exploded in real time. She asked for water and got slapped. "So black people gotta look like billionaires now. Girl, stop. You're done." Her hands shook as she tried to read them, but the stream was moving too fast. "She should have been in coach," Melanie muttered, not realizing her mic was still hot. That single phrase, broadcast live, sank her. Because somewhere in a conference room in Atlanta, the Blue Nova legal team was watching. So was a civil rights attorney. So was Amira's assistant. So was the FAA. The screen blipped. Stream frozen. Removed for violating policy on discriminatory speech. And for the first time in her life, Melanie Pierce felt the walls closing in. Not from turbulence but consequence. Back in first class, Captain Doug turned to Amira. "Would you like to address the passengers?" Amira shook her head slowly. "Not yet. Let the silence do what it needs to do." Doug nodded respectfully and returned to the cockpit. Behind her, a passenger whispered. She didn't scream, didn't curse, just stood there and let the world rearrange itself. It was poetic. But the story wasn't done. As Melanie slumped into her jump seat, defeated, her tablet buzzed once more. This time with a private message from a Blue Nova executive. "We know what you did 2 years ago. Surveillance pulled. Statement coming. Prepare." Melanie's hands began to shake violently. Because she realized now, Amira had been planning this all along. The applause had long faded, and Melanie's stream had gone dark. But in Amira's mind another moment replayed. A quieter humiliation, smaller in scale, yet no less cutting. It hadn't happened in the sky. It happened on the ground. Hours earlier, long before she boarded the plane that would change everything, Amira stood at the private terminal gate in Newark International Airport, dressed in her signature black hoodie and sleek joggers, with no makeup and her hair pulled into a low bun. She didn't turn heads. She repelled them. At the security checkpoint, the TSA agent, barely glanced at her boarding pass before handing it back with the dismissive tone reserved for wrong place, wrong person situations. Coach Line is that way, he said without even making eye contact. Amira looked down at the first-class designation printed boldly at the top. I know, she replied softly, not smiling. The agent frowned, then gestured her through, muttering something under his breath. She stepped forward, past the velvet rope marking the divide between priority and everyone else, where 3 white passengers in tailored suits were mid-conversation. One paused and gave her the look, subtle, but clear, the kind that says, you lost. Another scoffed softly. Silicon Valley sure is casual these days, he murmured to his friend, not quietly enough. Amira didn't respond. She'd learned long ago that every clapback, every correction, came at a price, and today she was saving her voice. At the gate counter, she approached the attendant to verify her access to pre-boarding. The young white woman behind the desk didn't greet her, just looked her up and down, sighed, then said, you must be in the wrong group. We're boarding Group 1 first class. I am Group 1, Amira said, holding out her digital ticket. The agent didn't even take the phone. Ma'am, this lane is for VIP and select elite status. You'll need to. A supervisor walked by just then, caught sight of Amira's name on the screen, and froze. Oh, the supervisor said, cutting in. She's pre-approved for concierge boarding. Full clear. Apologies, Miss Collins. The gate agent blinked in confusion. You're Amira Collins? A flicker of shame passed through her eyes. Amira nodded once. The gate agent's cheeks flushed, but she still didn't apologize, just waved her through and turned away, embarrassed but unrepentant. As Amira walked toward the jet bridge, she heard whispers behind her. She doesn't look like a CEO. Maybe she married rich, probably some TikTok scammer. She boarded in silence, shoulders straight, eyes forward. Even outside the terminal, the indignity had begun hours earlier. That morning, her chauffeur, a man in his mid-50s who'd been assigned by the car service, had pulled up in a Blacktown car and stepped out holding a sign, C. Johnson. Amira approached him anyway. I believe that's for me, she said calmly. He looked her over. You're C. Johnson? No, she said with a faint smile. The reservation's under Carla Johnson, but I'm Amira Collins. It was booked under my assistant's name. The driver blinked. You sure? He asked. Yes, I'm sure. He hesitated, clearly trying to reconcile her appearance with his expectations. No offense, ma'am. Just, we usually drive business execs. I thought never mind. Amira slid into the car without another word. Now sitting back in seat 1A mid-flight, the memory struck with new clarity. All of it. The looks, the tone, the gate agent's hesitation, the laughter behind her back. It hadn't been about her hoodie, or her posture, or even her silence. It was about the way her skin challenged their assumptions. But now, those same passengers were leaning toward her with awe. Lily McHale, the influencer from earlier, tiptoed back up to the front, lips pressed together nervously. Miss Collins, she asked. Amira looked up. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for how I looked at you earlier. When you first boarded, I judged you. It wasn't conscious, but it was real. And now, she trailed off, unsure how to finish. Amira said nothing, just met her eyes and waited. You made me look at myself, Lily continued. If you ever want to collaborate or even just talk, I'd be honored. Amira gave a small nod. Thank you, she said. But it wasn't Lily's words that pierced her the most. It was the sound of sneakers hurriedly approaching from the mid-cabin rows. A man in his early 30s, white, slightly disheveled, paused at the galley and stared at Amira like he'd seen a ghost.
Excuse me, he said, breathless.
I think we were at the terminal together earlier. I was the guy who, laughed when you went into the first-class line. Amira raised her eyebrows. I didn't know who you were, and I realize now that's kind of the point. She said nothing. He stepped closer, then held up his phone. Would it be okay if I got a selfie? For a moment, time stalled. The girl who was ignored by TSA. The woman who was side-eyed at the gate. A billionaire who'd been slapped for asking for water. Now they wanted to capture her.
Not as a threat.
But as a symbol. Amira studied the man for a moment, then slowly stood straightening her hoodie. No selfie, she said gently. The man's face dropped. But she wasn't done. Not yet. As the man stepped back awkwardly, Amira's phone buzzed again. This time, a name flashed on the screen she hadn't expected to see. Melanie Pierce's attorney. And the message? My client is prepared to tell her full version, including who told her to target you. The cabin was still midair, but the pressure wasn't just atmospheric, it was corporate, invisible, mounting and full of threat. Amira's phone buzzed again. This time, not from followers or press or allies. It was Blue Nova's executive board, calling from their crisis bunker in Midtown Manhattan. She stared at the screen. 7 directors on the line, the kind of people who never reached out directly unless money, legacy, or litigation were on fire. She answered without hesitation. Amira, came the voice of Dale Henstridge, the board chair, calm but tight. We're urging you to issue no further public statements until we've aligned with PR and legal. Another board member cut in. You're trending in 26 countries. This is a moment of extraordinary exposure. One misstep, and you could compromise shareholder confidence. Amira didn't miss the subtext. Protect the company, not the victim. Not even if the victim was the owner. Gentlemen, she said, voice icy but composed. You want me to sit quietly in seat 1A, smile for the cameras, and let this be sanitized. But I'm not a headline you get to spin. I am the headline. Amira, Dale warned. Just give us time to run this through the right channels. I am the channel, she interrupted. There will be a press conference, on the ground. The moment we land. A beat of silence. Then Dale sighed. If you move forward with this, you're on your own. Don't expect the board to back every word. I don't need backup, she replied and hung up. The phone felt heavier in her hand now. Not because of its weight, but because of what she'd just rejected. Safety. Shielding. The easy out. She had chosen truth instead. Meanwhile, at the rear of the aircraft, Melanie sat alone, disgraced, cornered but far from quiet. Her arms were crossed, her jaw clenched. 2 junior flight attendants had been quietly tasked with escorting her to the private back row jump seat, far from crew controls and passenger interaction. This is illegal, Melanie muttered. I'm going to sue. This is all performative. You think they care about her? Wait until the next flight, and it's business as usual. Greta, now fully distanced from her colleague, said nothing. She simply slipped Melanie a sealed envelope, a letter from Blue Nova Legal. Before stepping away, Melanie ripped it open and scanned it. Her hands shook. A direct notice. Pending internal disciplinary hearing, indefinite suspension from all in-air duties, and formal investigation for cumulative patterns of racially inappropriate conduct during active service. Her teeth clenched. Unreal. All because she owns the plane. She didn't say Amira's name. She couldn't. Not yet. Up front, the cabin had changed. What had once been filled with tension and disbelief was now filled with reverence, and something deeper, hope, renewal. It came in the form of a soft voice. Excuse me, Miss Collins. Came a small whisper. Amira turned. A boy, maybe 10 years old, brown-skinned, freckles scattered across his nose, hair in tight coils, stood in the aisle, gripping a coloring book. His father hovered behind him, uncertain. The boy stepped forward and held out a page he'd drawn. It was crude but clear, a woman in a cape, flying a plane, and smiling. You're a superhero, the boy said. You didn't even yell or punch or nothing. You just stood there, and they listened. Amira stared at the drawing, her throat tightening. What's your name? She asked, crouching to meet him. Micah, he said. I want to build airplanes when I grow up. But sometimes, people laugh. Like I'm dreaming too big. She took the paper and smiled softly. Then I'll keep this, she said. And when you're building jets one day, I'll show it to you again. Just to remind you that dreams don't need permission. Micah beamed. His father mouthed a thank you, and gently led him back to their row. Greta, nearby, wiped her eyes discreetly. But the moment wasn't done. The intercom buzzed. This time not from the captain. It was the first officer. Miss Collins, he said with urgency. We've received a direct call from the FAA and onboard federal monitors. They're requesting immediate communication with you and the captain. Amira stood, composed but alert. She stepped into the cockpit, where Captain Doug handed her a tablet. FAA, he said quietly. And not just about this flight. She read the screen. Her eyes narrowed.
FAA or a flight attendant. Melanie Pierce.
Subject: prior in-flight complaints and incident reports. Released under Emergency Disclosure Protocol. What followed was a shocking dossier. March 2019. Reported for aggressive tone and alleged verbal abuse toward a black mother traveling alone with 2 toddlers. No formal discipline. June 2021. Passenger complaint from an Indian-American businessman. Denied pre-boarding access, though his name matched the manifest. Handled internally. December 2022. African diplomat reported for unauthorized entry into first class, despite holding a diplomatic travel clearance. Complaint dismissed. Current flight. High-profile assault. On record. Captured. Publicized. It wasn't an isolated mistake. It was a pattern. And Amira knew now. This wasn't about a single slap. This was about a broken pipeline where accountability had been delayed, denied, and covered up for years. Captain, she said calmly. We land in 40 minutes, correct? Yes, he replied. Runway clear. We're being met with security and press. She turned the tablet to him. I want this transmitted to every major outlet the moment we touch down. You sure? She nodded. Let the world know this wasn't spontaneous. This was system failure, dressed as protocol. Just then, a secondary message pinged beneath the FAA file. An audio transcript, voice memo, pulled from Flight 11. She pressed play. Melanie's voice came through. Faint but clear. She doesn't look like a billionaire. She's probably lying. We can make her uncomfortable enough to ask her to leave. Captain Doug's face paled. And Amira? She didn't flinch. She just said, play it again. Loud. For the whole cabin. The wheels screeched gently against the tarmac. Flight 1112 had landed, but the tension on board hadn't. The cabin remained silent, not from fear, but anticipation. Seatbelts clicked open in unison, like synchronized breath after holding it too long. Through the oval windows, flashing lights could be seen. Camera crews, law enforcement, and a growing crowd of civilians gathering at the private terminal. The captain's voice came over the intercom one last time. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Please remain seated until directed to disembark. Blue Nova has authorized a post-flight announcement by our executive chairwoman, Amira Collins. Every screen blinked to life. Every phone aimed forward. When the cabin doors finally opened, Amira stood alone at the threshold. No bodyguards. No PR handler. Just her. The moment her foot touched the jet bridge, flashes exploded from every direction. The terminal lobby had been transformed into an impromptu press zone. Cameras stacked shoulder to shoulder, reporters shouting questions, security barely containing the frenzy. But Amira didn't flinch. She walked to the designated podium, already placed outside the arrival gate. Her posture calm, elegant, composed. Behind her, the Blue Nova logo shimmered softly on the screen. In front of her, the world. The murmurs quieted. She stepped up to the mic, looked directly into the wall of lenses, and spoke not with practiced charisma, but unfiltered truth. I wasn't going to say anything, she began. I was going to let the flight land, handle this internally, and disappear back into my schedule like so many black women are taught to do. The silence grew deeper. But then I realized, silence protects no one. She scanned the crowd. I was slapped at 40,000 feet. Not because I posed a threat, not because I broke a rule, but because I asked for water politely. And the woman who struck me didn't see a CEO, or a mother, or a founder. She saw a threat. She saw blackness. And in her mind, that was enough. Gasps rippled through the terminal. She looked at me and decided I didn't belong. That my skin meant I must have been lost. Must have snuck in. Must have deserved less. And that decision, the one she made without a single question, is a decision this world makes against people who look like me, every single day. She paused, her voice catching for the first time. I need you to understand this. My skin is not a weapon. My presence is not a crime. My calm does not mean consent. And my silence will never again be mistaken for submission. Applause erupted. First from passengers who had just exited behind her. Then from the press. Then from the growing civilian crowd outside. But this isn't just about me, Amira continued. This is about Micah, the little boy who handed me a picture of a flying superhero. It's about Yolanda, the flight attendant, who was silenced 20 years ago. It's about the millions of us asked to shrink ourselves to survive, to tone it down, to be palatable. Her voice rose now, not in anger, but clarity. You want to know why I bought an airline? Because I was tired of being humiliated by systems built to strip us of dignity mid-flight. Because if you're black and successful, they ask if you're lost. If you're black and outspoken, they call you hostile. If you're black and silent, they still erase you. A few reporters lowered their cameras, visibly moved. And now you know who I am. She smiled, not out of pride, but defiance. I'm Amira Collins. I built Skyloft. I own Blue Nova. I fly higher not to escape, but to remind the sky that we belong there too. Thunderous applause broke out. The video was already streaming. TikTok clips were flooding timelines. A live stream from NBC News had crossed 2.1 million views in 10 minutes. Twitter lit up. Instagram Reels reposted her speech in slow motion, with captions and piano tracks. Billionaire While Black trended at #1 globally. Young black girls watching from across the terminal began shouting her name like she was a rock star. Amira, Miss Collins, you did it. You showed them. One girl, maybe 13, held up a handmade sign. Representation isn't luxury. It's oxygen. Amira's eyes welled slightly, but she held firm. She wasn't going to cry here. Not now. Not in front of the world. Behind her, Carlo arrived, whispering into her ear. All major networks have requested an exclusive. Also, your numbers just jumped 400K followers in under an hour, and corporate is freaking out. Good, Amira whispered back. Let them. But just as she turned to leave the podium, a figure pushed through the security ropes. A tall, pale man in a tailored charcoal suit. Sharp eyes, tight jaw. He held a briefcase and purpose. Amira Collins, he announced, projecting his voice like a courtroom actor. I'm legal counsel for Melanie Pierce. The crowd shifted. Security tensed. He held out a thick envelope and spoke directly into the cameras. My client is filing a formal defamation countersuit against Blue Nova and its owner for reputational damage, unlawful termination, and coordinated public harassment. Gasps again. Ms. Pierce maintains that the incident was misrepresented, the disciplinary action excessive, and that the owner of the airline used undue influence to manipulate public perception. Amira's face didn't move. The attorney stepped closer. We are prepared to go to federal court, and we have witnesses willing to testify that Miss Collins expressed inappropriate hostility prior to the incident. The energy in the terminal shifted slightly. The seed of doubt had been planted. Even the cameras hesitated, unsure whether to keep filming the hero or examine the villain they had been told to hate. Amira stepped down slowly from the podium, took the envelope, and opened it without blinking. She skimmed the first page.
Done the second.
A smirk, barely perceptible, crossed her lips. She looked up, eyes sharp. Tell your client I accept her challenge. Then she leaned in and whispered, so only he could hear. Ask her if she really wants me to show what's in the flight footage from 2 years ago. Because that wasn't the first time, and I have every second of it. The attorney's face drained of color. And across the terminal, one camera captured the moment perfectly. Amira Collins, silent but unshaken, standing taller than ever, while her opponent began to unravel. The media storm didn't settle. It mutated. By morning, Amira Collins' face was plastered across cable networks, news websites, late-night monologues, and TikTok reaction videos. Her speech, "My skin is not a weapon," was clipped, slowed, dissected, and turned into audio remixes. Some called it the defining moment of a generation. Others? They called it a lie. The counter-narrative began where it always does, on conservative talk radio. Now hold on just a minute, drawled Wesley Grant, a syndicated host, infamous for turning victimhood into political theater. We have one side of the story, sure, but where's the full footage? Where's the proof that this so-called billionaire didn't provoke the incident? He smirked into the microphone. I'm just asking questions. And isn't that still legal in America? From there, the story splintered. A headline from a fringe tabloid read, Black billionaire plays race card after mid-air tantrum. Was it all a PR stunt? The phrase race hustler started trending. Not because it was true, but because it was easy to weaponize. Simple, dangerous. By mid-afternoon, Melanie Pierce, seated comfortably in a private legal suite, gave an exclusive interview to a conservative media outlet. Her hair was freshly blown out, makeup soft, demeanor shaken, but intentional. I was scared, she said softly. I didn't know who she was. She raised her voice. She called me names. I reacted out of instinct. I never meant to strike anyone, but the cabin was chaotic, and I felt threatened. The interviewer nodded sympathetically. So you're saying she was aggressive first? I don't want to accuse anyone, Melanie said, but there was contact, and she was very intimidating. The clip exploded. Who really slapped who? The headline asked. Flight attendant claims assault came first. And just like that, the gaslighting began. Within hours, Coordinated accounts began posting old photos of Amira partying in Ibiza, smiling in a backless dress with a champagne flute. "She doesn't look so oppressed here," one tweet sneered, with over 40,000 likes. Another user posted a 6-second edit of Amira joking on a podcast about being aggressively ambitious. She admitted it herself. The caption read, "She pushes people." None of it had to be true. It only had to look messy. Amira, back in her Manhattan townhouse, sat in silence as her PR team scrambled. Screens glowed with trending hashtags, alerts, crisis briefings. Her comms director, Nina Voigt, clicked through each slide faster than her voice could keep up. "Melanie's interview already has 3.2 million views on X," Nina said. "We're getting split headlines. MSNBC is standing by you. But Fox is digging in. NYT's op-ed desk is asking for a response." Another assistant interjected. "Daily Mail just posted photos of you with a glass of wine and a male friend. Caption says mystery man. They're suggesting he's your crisis strategist. He's your cousin, right?" Amira didn't move. Her arms were crossed. Not in defiance but containment. "I said nothing threatening," she whispered. "I know," Nina said quickly, "but the ambiguity is their weapon now." The room went quiet. Then Amira finally looked up. "They're not coming for the truth. They're coming for the illusion that power can't look like me." Nina nodded. "Exactly. And the more poised you are, the more threatening you seem. It's a double bind." Carla, her assistant, tapped on her phone. "Should we release the flight's security footage?" "Not yet," Amira said. "Let them talk. Let them dig." A beat of silence passed. Then came the twist. It began with a simple post. No name. No caption. Just a video file. It appeared first on Reddit, buried in a thread about aviation standards. Then it spread like wildfire. An anonymous account posted, "Here's the part of the flight you didn't see. Audio included." The file played from inside the cabin, taken by someone seated 2 rows behind first class. The camera was shaky, phone hidden in a magazine, but the audio was crystal clear. Melanie's voice was unmistakable. "She doesn't look like a billionaire. She's probably lying. I'll just ignore her until she flips." Another crew member's voice responded, barely audible. "Mel, don't. Just get her the damn water." "No. Let's see how far she pushes it. She wants attention? I'll give her attention." Then the sound of footsteps. The slap. The gasps. And the coldest line of all. "She should have stayed in coach." The video ended. Unedited. Timestamp. It was damning. Within 30 minutes, it was on CNN, NBC, Al Jazeera, The Guardian, and every black news outlet in America. The audio was so clear, even lip readers weren't needed. For a moment silence returned to the internet. But it wasn't the silence of doubt. It was the silence of reckoning. Even supporters who'd hesitated now listened in disbelief. "She should have stayed in coach" was reborn. Not as a slogan of power, but a graveyard for Melanie's career. Nina looked up from her phone, blinking. "It's gone nuclear." Amira nodded. "Good," she said. "They wanted the story to shift. Now it has." Carla's phone rang FaceTime. She turned it to Amira slowly. "It's Yolanda," she said. On screen, Yolanda appeared pale, shaken. "I just remembered something," she said, voice low. Melanie didn't act alone. 2 other flight attendants were whispering. Like they'd planned it. "I think this was bigger than just a slap." Amira's expression changed instantly. "Get me their names," she said. "Now." The studio lights hit Melanie's skin like interrogation lamps. She sat beneath the glowing logo of Real Talk Now, one of the nation's highest-rated current affairs programs. Across from her sat Dana Carlisle, a seasoned anchor known for breaking scandal stories and for keeping her guests sweating. But Melanie wasn't sweating. She came dressed in soft grays. A silk blouse that suggested humility, with her hair pulled back into a low bun. Her makeup was neutral, professional, but her posture, defiant, back straight, chin tilted upward. She looked more like a whistleblower than a woman under fire. Dana opened the segment with a clipped summary of the now infamous slap, the leaked audio, and Amira Collins' viral speech. And then she turned to Melanie. "Ms. Pierce," she began, "you've seen the footage, heard the audio, and faced enormous backlash. Yet here you are. What do you want to say to the public?" Melanie's voice was steady, studied. "I'm here because people think they know what happened. But they weren't in that cabin with me. They didn't feel what I felt." Dana raised an eyebrow. "Which was?" "Threatened," Melanie said bluntly. She was forceful. Entitled. I asked a simple question, and she responded with aggression. Dana didn't blink. There's no video of her raising her voice. No footage of her making threats. Melanie shrugged. Body language is hard to capture on camera. It was the way she looked at me. Dana leaned in. You've been quoted saying she didn't look like an owner. What did you mean by that? Melanie paused. This was the moment. The one her crisis PR handler had begged her to navigate carefully. I meant, she said, drawing each word out slowly. She didn't look like someone who owned a fleet of planes. She was in sweatpants, hoodie, no entourage. She just didn't match the profile. Dana tilted her head. And what is that profile exactly? Melanie opened her mouth, then hesitated. I'm not going to apologize, she said instead. Because this rush to cancel me, this assumption that I'm evil, is just as prejudiced as what I'm being accused of. I've served this country's skies for 22 years. I've cared for thousands of passengers, and this one incident. Dana interrupted. This one incident follows 3 prior complaints, now public, all involving passengers of color. Melanie's lips tightened. Coincidences can be stacked, Dana. That doesn't make them malicious. The interview aired live. By midnight, the internet was ablaze again. But this time with a different tone. Melanie had crossed an unspoken line. It wasn't a lack of remorse. It wasn't even the denial. It was the way she insisted she was the victim. Despite mounting proof, she had exercised power like a weapon, and felt entitled to. Social media erupted. She's not just unapologetic. She's entitled and dangerous. She still thinks Amira should have dressed up to prove she mattered. White fragility in HD. This is what unchecked bias looks like. By dawn, the damage was irreparable. 3 sponsors pulled funding from Blue Nova's upcoming aviation symposium. 2 partner airlines suspended cross-staffing agreements. A major streaming service canceled Melanie's upcoming memoir adaptation. And yet when her name came up in Blue Nova's internal review board meeting, Amira surprised everyone. She shouldn't be fired, Amira said quietly, scanning the room of legal advisors and PR reps. Nina blinked. I'm sorry. What? I said she shouldn't be fired, Amira repeated. A silence fell over the table. One of the HR execs leaned in cautiously. With respect, Miss Collins, she's become a brand liability. Public pressure is mounting. Retaining her sends the wrong message. I disagree, Amira said. Erasing her is the easy route. But this isn't about my personal comfort. It's about cultural accountability. She turned to Carla. Put her on indefinite leave. Pay her. Give her access to anti-bias education, restorative dialogue training. And? Carla asked. Amira's eyes gleamed, not with vengeance, but purpose. Invite her to speak. Publicly, but not as the accused. You want her to apologize in a press release? No, Amira replied. I want her to sit next to me, on camera, and talk about what she really believed when she looked at me. Nina's voice dropped. You want her on a televised panel? Amira nodded. Make it about racism in aviation. Not corporate scandal. Not redemption arc. Truth. Put her in a chair next to me. And let the world see what unlearning looks like. The room was stunned. One exec murmured. This could backfire. She's unpredictable. Then let her be unpredictable, Amira said. I'd rather fight for transformation than trend for justice. The story was no longer about optics. It was about education. An hour later, Amira's team reached out to Melanie's lawyer with a formal offer. You're invited to join a live broadcast panel, hosted by Global Talk Media, on racism in aviation. Participation is voluntary. But silence, at this point, will be interpreted as evasion. Melanie read the email twice. Her jaw clenched. She didn't delete it, because for the first time her defiance was cracking, not from guilt but from the realization that Amira wasn't playing the game she'd expected. This wasn't a takedown, it was a mirror. Melanie closed her laptop slowly, then picked up her phone. She dialed a number she hadn't used in years. A woman answered. Hello? Melanie's voice cracked. Mom, do you remember that girl I told you about? The one from that flight years ago. Pause. She's not just back. She owns the plane. And she just invited me to sit beside her on live TV. Silence. Then her mother asked, do you finally see what you did? The auditorium buzzed with attention that was neither fear nor excitement, but expectation. It was a landmark event. Skies of Change, Race, Power, and Aviation. Hosted by Global Talk Media. Filmed live. Streaming in 14 countries. Attendance by invitation only. but millions watching worldwide. And at the center of it stood Amira Collins, alone on stage beneath a glowing red circle, and 3 stark white letters behind her. Ted. She didn't wear a suit or a designer dress. She wore black slacks, a tucked-in button-down, and a navy blazer, elegant, professional, and intentionally neutral. Her afro puffed slightly over her shoulders, like a soft halo, and her voice, when it came, was steady. I wasn't always in first class, she began, and I wasn't always invisible either. But somewhere between boarding passes and boardrooms, I realized the deeper I rose, the harder the world tried to make me feel small. The lights dimmed. A massive projection screen behind her flickered to life. An image appeared, a black woman sitting alone in the back row of a private jet, head down, shoulders curled inward, hoodie pulled over her hair. "That's me," Amira said. The audience gasped quietly. 2 years ago, on this very aircraft, my aircraft, I had just quietly acquired Blue Nova. Nobody knew yet. I hadn't announced it. I was flying anonymously. First class was empty, except for a handful of executives. I asked for a seat in the front. A flight attendant told me to take the back, said they had protocols for passenger sorting. I asked why. She said some clients prefer to be away from noise. She clicked to the next slide. A copy of her purchase agreement, dated 1 week prior to the flight, signed, sealed. "I owned the plane," she said softly, "and they sat me in the back of it." Silence filled the room like fog. Not because I asked nicely, not because I didn't fit, but because they didn't see me as someone who could belong in the front. She turned to the audience. "And that's not just about airplanes." Murmurs. Sniffles. Even from the balcony. "It happens in offices, classrooms, boardrooms, job interviews. We walk in with credentials, excellence, and brilliance. But the question that always comes first is, are you sure you're supposed to be here?" She took a slow breath. "I'm not sharing this story because I want your sympathy. I don't need that. I built Skyloft from nothing. I negotiated deals from rooftops and back corners of tech expos. I clawed my way into rooms where people thought my assistant was the CEO, and I was the intern." She paused. The crowd leaned in. "I'm sharing it because the only thing that ever made me doubt myself wasn't failure. It was being made to feel invisible in places I helped build." More images flashed. Infographics of hiring disparity in aviation, microaggressions reported in anonymous airline employee surveys, and finally testimonials from anonymous passengers who had experienced discrimination in the skies. And then came the final image. The cabin photo, again, but this time, zoomed in on Amira's eyes. Hollow, tired. I sat in that back seat with my name printed on the ownership ledger. And the woman who assigned me that seat is here today. There was a sharp collective inhale. Backstage, Melanie Pierce sat stiffly, watching the monitor. Her eyes were glassy, hands folded so tightly her knuckles blanched. She hadn't spoken since arriving. She didn't know what to say. Because there, in front of thousands, Amira wasn't just indicting the system. She was holding a mirror up to every person who ever looked through someone, instead of at them. The crowd rose in waves, applause breaking, crashing, rebuilding. Some stood, some cried, some simply bowed their heads. It wasn't performative. It was released. Amira nodded once, stepped back, and left the stage. No dramatic exit, no music, just truth. Backstage, Melanie turned away from the screen. She wiped her eyes discreetly, then stood as if to leave. But she didn't get far. A familiar voice called softly from the shadows. "Melanie." She turned. Yolanda Green stepped forward, holding something in her hands. A small black leather-bound book. "This belongs to you," Yolanda said. "You dropped it years ago. After that flight you don't remember. I kept it." Melanie blinked, confused. "What is it?" Yolanda held it out. A journal, old, faded, but unmistakably hers. Melanie opened it slowly. Her breath caught. Inside were her own handwritten entries. Passenger 1A. Doesn't belong. Probably a diversity hire. Keeps asking for things like she runs the place. Can't wait to be off this route. Too many of them flying private now. Just smiled at a black girl who looked like my old classmate. Weird guilt moment. Entry after entry. Unfiltered. Unvarnished. Undeniable. Melanie's hand trembled. "Why? Why didn't you tell anyone?" Yolanda met her gaze. "Because back then I was still scared. But now, I'm tired of fear." Melanie looked down at her own words. Her face paled. Everything she tried to bury was written in her own hand. From behind them, a producer's voice called out, 5 minutes until panel seating. Miss Collins is asking if Melanie is ready. Melanie clutched the journal, her eyes wide. And for the first time, she didn't know if she was. The auditorium dimmed again, the murmuring audience unaware that history was about to turn another corner. Backstage, Amira Collins stood holding the old leather-bound journal. Her fingers traced the edges, not out of curiosity, but care. She had only skimmed it during the break. But the words inside echoed louder than the crowd waiting outside. She stepped onto the stage once more, not with the fire of vindication, but the solemnity of responsibility. The room, still half standing from her earlier talk, settled into silence. A single stool sat at the center now, a small glass of water beside it, the lights dimmed to a softer hue, a more intimate space. Amira took a seat. In her hand she held the journal. I didn't ask for this, she began softly. I didn't expect this. But this journal, it's not fiction. It's not a manifesto. It's a mirror.
The room stilled.
It belonged to Melanie Pierce. Gasps. She didn't intend for it to be public, and I didn't intend to read it. But then I did, and I realized something. This isn't a villain's confession. It's a blueprint of the sickness we never name. She opened to a dog-eared page. Her voice was gentle as she read. I saw a black woman today, who looked like the girls I went to high school with. The ones who always got attention, not because they were loud, but because they didn't have to try. I hated that. Still do. A sharp inhale from the second row. Amira continued. Steady. Every time I see a black woman in luxury, I feel two things, shame and rage. Shame that I didn't work hard enough. Rage that they got there before I did. She closed the book for a moment. This isn't about hating black people. That's too simple. This is about envying what you've been told should never belong to them. Another page opened. I fake smiles. I perform diversity. But deep down I don't believe we're the same. I tell myself I'm not racist. But the truth is, I don't want them to win. Because if they win, then what does that make me? Tears welled in the eyes of some audience members, especially the black women in the crowd. Amira's voice didn't break. Melanie didn't share this journal. She didn't stand here to read it. But I will. Not to destroy her, not to cancel her, but because if we don't say the truth out loud, we'll keep feeding the lie in silence. She looked directly into the camera. We can't heal what we won't face. She closed the journal gently. Then I was going to keep this private. Let her deal with it off stage. But then I thought about every little black girl watching this broadcast. Every woman who's been told to tone it down, or been seated in the back of her own plane. They need to know this. What happened to me wasn't an accident. It was designed. A long pause. Her final line came not as a flourish, but as fact. And if design can create harm, then design can also undo it. From the wings, a door opened. A quiet moment passed. Then Melanie Pierce stepped onto the stage. Not in heels. Not in a styled outfit. Just jeans, a cardigan, and eyes that had finally begun to understand the storm they'd created. She didn't walk with confidence. She walked like someone stepping into accountability, not for applause, but truth. The audience didn't clap. They didn't boo either. They just watched. Every eye focused, every breath held. Melanie approached the microphone slowly, hands shaking. She looked at Amira, who stepped aside but stayed on stage, with her not against her. Melanie's voice cracked before she even spoke. I don't deserve this mic, she said quietly. And maybe that's the point. No one interrupted. They read every line in that journal. She continued. I wrote those things. In airports. In hotel rooms. In jump seats. I wrote them because I believed them. I believed I was better. I believed they didn't belong. She wiped her face once, then stared at the crowd. I sat women in the back because it made me feel like I had power. I ignored black customers because I convinced myself they'd never tip. I smiled at passengers and judged them in my head. She looked directly at Amira now. And when you asked for water, I didn't see a woman. I didn't see an owner. I saw everything I resented. And I used my uniform to remind you of your place. Gasps. A sob from someone in row 5. I've been called racist this month, more than I've been called by my friends. And you know what? I deserve that. Because I was. Maybe I still am. But I'm not gonna lie to you. She took a shaky breath. I'm not sorry because of the backlash. I'm sorry because I finally believe you never deserved it. Silent. Utter, devastating silence. Then she leaned forward again and whispered, barely audible but unmistakable, I was wrong. As the audience processed the moment, a spotlight from the balcony turned on, illuminating a woman standing alone. It was the wife of the Blue Nova board chair, white, silent, with a tear-streaked face. She raised her hand and spoke clearly. I have something to say. I was on that flight 2 years ago, and I saw everything. Gasps. Melanie turned pale. Amira turned slowly. The truth wasn't done yet. 1 year later, the echoes of that slap had transformed into something no one could have predicted. Not scandal, not silence. Structure, systems, soaring change. Amira Collins stood beneath the banner of a brand new initiative, Fly Future Leaders in the Sky, a national mentorship program created for women of color pursuing aviation careers. The launch event wasn't held in a conference room or hotel ballroom. It was hosted in Hangar 6 at JFK, surrounded by Blue Nova jets, shining under morning sun. The program already had 2,000 applications and was backed by major tech, aerospace, and civil rights organizations. I wanted to build a program, Amira told the crowd, where no girl would ever be asked if she belonged in the sky. She'd already know she did. The crowd applauded, but Amira's eyes were scanning for someone, and then she saw her. Melanie Pierce, no longer a flight attendant, not wearing a uniform, instead seated in the front row as a student. Melanie's face had changed, softer, a little older, not just physically, but emotionally. She looked like someone who'd been broken down and rebuilt from the inside. She met Amira's eyes, didn't flinch. She simply gave the smallest nod. After her public confession, Melanie had disappeared from media coverage, but not from the work. She enrolled in racial bias courses, completed airline cultural sensitivity training, and at Amira's quiet invitation, applied to FLA. She didn't ask to be forgiven. She earned her way back by starting over from the bottom. When asked by reporters how she felt being part of the program, Melanie had answered plainly, every lesson I teach now comes from what I used to ignore. I'm not here to rewrite history. I'm here to own it. The crowd had no idea who she was, at least not until Amira shared her story in week 1. Then no one shamed her. They thanked her for staying, because staying meant doing the work when the cameras were gone. Inside Hangar 6, a wall-sized screen played the once infamous video, but this time it wasn't viral for violence. It was used as curriculum, played in airline training programs nationwide to teach staff about power dynamics, coded language, and unchecked bias. The title had been rebranded, Bias at 40,000 Feet, What One Slap Taught an Industry. After the mentorship speeches, Amira slipped out of the hangar and walked across the tarmac to one of Blue Nova's newer jets, sleek, gold-tipped wings, twin-engine precision. A quiet flight was scheduled to Seattle for a private speaking engagement. She boarded without entourage. Still no designer bags, just a thin briefcase, her laptop, and her favorite hoodie. She didn't request anything. She just took her seat in row 2, near the window, and watched the ground crew load the final cargo. Moments later, the pilot came on the intercom. Welcome aboard Blue Nova 142, non-stop to Seattle. This flight will be captained by Erica Thompson, Blue Nova's first black female international pilot.
The cabin burst into applause.
Amira smiled gently. She already knew Erica. She'd personally mentored her through her final certifications. Erica had worked for 5 years in Blue Nova's maintenance crew before anyone had asked her if she wanted to fly. Now, she was in the cockpit, and she belonged. As the jet taxied, Amira looked across the aisle and noticed a mother holding her young daughter, maybe 6 or 7, the exact age Amira was when she first imagined flying. The little girl stared out the window, with her mouth open in awe. When she noticed Amira watching, she smiled shyly. Amira gave her a soft wink. Takeoff began. Engines roared. The aircraft tilted upward, sharp, confident, and clean. They were in the sky again. 30 minutes into the flight, as drinks were being served, a flight attendant approached Amira. She was new, nervous, young. She held a water bottle in one hand and paused. "Excuse me," she said hesitantly. "You look really familiar. I'm sorry, but are you?" Amira tilted her head, her smile warm but unreadable. The attendant whispered, "Are you, Miss CEO?" The cabin went still. A beat. Then Amira leaned forward slightly, voice calm. eyes kind. I'm just a passenger, she said. Then paused and added, but yes, I am. The attendant looked horrified. Oh my God, I should have known. I mean, I wasn't trying to. Amira gently raised her hand. No need to explain. Just don't assume the next girl in this seat isn't important. The young woman nodded rapidly. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. She turned to go, but before she did, she looked back and said, I joined the company because of that video. The one where you didn't yell. Amira smiled again. Glad you saw it. As the attendant moved on, Amira leaned back into her seat. She didn't cry. She didn't gloat. She just looked out the window, watched the clouds, and thought about everything that had happened between being struck and becoming a symbol. From slap to soar. As the flight descended over Seattle, the captain's voice returned over the intercom. Also folks, just a heads up, our owner is on board today. No need for applause, but you may want to smile. Amira chuckled quietly. Then the attendant returned.
Miss CEO, there's someone waiting for you at the gate, she said.
Who? Amira asked. The attendant handed her a note. One word written in thick black ink. Dad. Amira's heart stopped, because her father hadn't spoken to her in 17 years. No one should have to prove their worth just to be treated with basic dignity. If you've ever been judged before being heard, or silenced when you dared to speak, you all